The world we live in today is shaped by an ideology that many haven't even heard of: neoliberalism. It's the invisible hand guiding our economies, our politics, and even our personal lives. But where did it come from, and what impact is it really having? A quick aside before we move on. It's a common misconception, especially in online spaces, that neoliberal is simply a synonym for a young, more centrist Democrat. This is inaccurate and obscures the true meaning of neoliberalism. Here's a quick clarification. Neoliberalism is an economic ideology. It's a set of ideas about how the economy should be structured, emphasizing free markets, deregulation, privatization, and limited government intervention. It's not tied to any specific political party or age group. Neoliberalism has a history. As we will discuss, it emerged in the mid-20th century and gained prominence in the 1980s with leaders like Reagan and Thatcher. It has roots in classical liberalism but is distinct in its emphasis on market-based solutions to social problems. Neoliberalism has global influence. It's not just an American phenomenon. It has shaped economic policies worldwide, influencing international trade agreements, development strategies, and even social welfare programs. Many Democrats have embraced neoliberal policies. This is where the confusion arises. While some Democrats advocate for more social programs and regulations, many have also embraced neoliberal policies like free trade and deregulation, particularly in the 1990s and 2000s. This doesn't make them neoliberals in the true sense of the ideology, but it highlights the complexity of political positions. In essence, using neoliberal simply to describe a certain type of Democrat is a misrepresentation of a complex economic ideology with a rich history and global impact. It's important to understand its true meaning to have a more informed discussion about economic policy and its consequences. To understand neoliberalism, we need to go back to its roots in classical liberalism. Liberalism, as a distinct political philosophy, began to take shape in the 17th and 18th centuries, amidst a backdrop of absolute monarchies and rigid social hierarchies. Thinkers like John Locke articulated the concept of natural rights, arguing that individuals possessed inherent rights to life, liberty, and property that no government could legitimately infringe upon. This radical notion challenged the prevailing belief in the divine right of kings and laid the groundwork for limited government and individual autonomy. The Enlightenment further fueled liberalism's rise. Philosophers like Montesquieu advocated for the separation of powers, while Voltaire championed freedom of speech and religious tolerance. These ideas, coupled with growing dissatisfaction with oppressive rule, culminated in revolutions in America and France, where liberal ideals were enshrined in foundational documents like the Declaration of Independence and the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Classical liberalism, as this early form came to be known, emphasized individual freedom and limited government intervention in economic and social affairs. Adam Smith, in his seminal work The Wealth of Nations, argued that free markets, driven by individual self-interest and competition, would lead to greater prosperity for all. This laissez-faire approach to economics became a cornerstone of classical liberal thought. However, the Industrial Revolution, which began in the late 18th century and gained momentum throughout the 19th, exposed the limitations of unchecked individual liberty and unregulated markets. While industrialization brought about unprecedented economic growth and technological advancements, it also led to widespread poverty, harsh working conditions, and glaring social inequalities. The exploitation of workers, particularly women and children, in factories and mines, sparked calls for reform. Thinkers like John Stuart Mill, while still committed to individual liberty, recognized the need for government intervention to address social problems and ensure a more equitable distribution of wealth. This marked a shift towards what we now call modern liberalism, where the state plays a more active role in regulating the economy and providing social welfare. By the end of the 19th century, liberalism had evolved significantly from its classical roots. While still grounded in individual liberty, it had begun to grapple with the challenges of industrial society and the need for social reform. This tension between individual freedom and collective responsibility would continue to shape the development of liberalism in the 20th century and beyond. As the 20th century dawned, the limitations of laissez-faire capitalism became increasingly evident. The Industrial Revolution, while generating immense wealth, had also produced stark inequalities and social unrest. The Great Depression, with its mass unemployment and economic devastation, further exposed the fragility of unregulated markets. Liberalism, once synonymous with limited government and individual self-reliance, began to evolve. Thinkers like John Maynard Keynes challenged the prevailing economic orthodoxy, arguing that government intervention was necessary to stabilize the economy and mitigate the harsh cycles of boom and bust. This marked a shift towards a more interventionist approach, where the state took on a greater role in managing the economy and providing social safety nets. The rise of social democratic movements in Europe further fueled this transformation. These movements, inspired by socialist ideals but committed to democratic means, advocated for policies that would protect workers' rights, provide social security, and redistribute wealth. This led to the gradual development of the welfare state, a system in which the government takes responsibility for the well-being of its citizens, providing services like healthcare, education, and unemployment benefits. The mid-20th century witnessed the expansion of the welfare state in many Western countries. In the United States, President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal programs laid the foundation for a social safety net, while in the United Kingdom, the Beveridge Report outlined a comprehensive system of social insurance. These initiatives reflected a growing consensus that government had a responsibility to ensure a basic standard of living for all citizens, regardless of their economic circumstances. This shift towards a more interventionist state represented a significant departure from classical liberalism. While still grounded in individual liberty, liberalism now embraced a more expansive role for government in promoting social welfare and economic security. This new understanding of liberalism, often referred to as modern liberalism, acknowledged the limitations of unregulated markets and the need for collective action to address social problems. The development of the welfare state in the mid-20th century marked a pivotal moment in the evolution of liberalism. It reflected a growing recognition that individual freedom and social responsibility were not mutually exclusive, but rather complementary principles that could work together to create a more just and equitable society. The mid-20th century saw the rise of the welfare state and a more interventionist approach to governance in many Western nations. However, this consensus began to fray in the 1970s. Economic stagnation with rising inflation, known as stagflation, along with social unrest, created a sense of crisis and a fertile ground for new ideological currents. This is where neoliberalism, with its promise of revitalized economic growth and individual empowerment, took root and flourished. Neoliberalism, while drawing inspiration from classical liberalism, offered a distinct approach. It advocated for a more radical form of free market capitalism, emphasizing deregulation, privatization, and a reduced role for the state in economic and social affairs. Thinkers like Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman argued that government intervention was the root cause of economic woes, stifling innovation and distorting markets. They called for a return to laissez-faire principles, believing that unfettered markets would unleash entrepreneurial spirit and generate prosperity for all. This message resonated with many who felt disillusioned with the perceived failures of the welfare state. The election of Margaret Thatcher in the UK in 1979 and Ronald Reagan in the US a year later marked a turning point. These leaders implemented sweeping neoliberal reforms, cutting taxes, slashing regulations, and privatizing state-owned industries. They championed individual responsibility and entrepreneurialism, while casting social welfare programs as impediments to economic growth and personal initiative. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the subsequent collapse of the Soviet Union further emboldened the neoliberal agenda. It seemed to signal the triumph of capitalism and the demise of alternative economic systems. International institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund promoted neoliberal policies globally, often as a condition for loans and aid, further solidifying its dominance. The rise of neoliberalism in the 70s and 80s represented a significant shift in the political and economic landscape. It challenged the prevailing Keynesian consensus and ushered in an era of market liberalization, globalization, and a reduced role for the state. This transformation had profound consequences. shaping everything from labor relations and social welfare programs to international trade and environmental policy. Neoliberal capitalism, the dominant economic model of the past several decades, is facing a reckoning. While it is often argued that it has generated immense wealth and lifted millions out of poverty, it has also sown the seeds of numerous global crises, pushing our planet and its inhabitants to the brink. Here's an examination of how this system exacerbates or directly causes some of the most pressing issues of our time. Climate change. The relentless pursuit of growth under neoliberal capitalism, built on fossil fuels and unsustainable consumption patterns, is the primary driver of climate change. The externalization of environmental costs, deregulation, and the prioritization of short-term profits over long-term sustainability have created a system where environmental degradation is essentially subsidized. The consequences are already being felt worldwide, from rising sea levels and extreme weather events to food insecurity and mass displacement. Economic inequality. Neoliberal policies, such as tax cuts for the wealthy, deregulation of labor markets, and the erosion of social safety nets, have led to a dramatic increase in income and wealth inequality. This concentration of wealth in the hands of a few not only undermines social cohesion and political stability, but also, perhaps ironically, stifles economic growth by severely limiting upward mobility and making the prospect of starting new businesses or getting a better education unfeasible in the face of stagnant wages and no safety nets. The widening gap between the rich and the poor fuels social unrest, jeopardizes democracy, and creates fertile ground for extremism. 3. Global health crises. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed the fragility of healthcare systems weakened by decades of neoliberal reforms. Privatization, austerity measures, and the focus on cost efficiency have left many countries ill-equipped to handle public health emergencies. Furthermore, the emphasis on individual responsibility and the erosion of public services have exacerbated health disparities, with marginalized communities largely bearing the brunt of the pandemic. 4. Food insecurity. The industrialization of agriculture, driven by neoliberal policies that favor large-scale monoculture and export-oriented production, has undermined food sovereignty and resilience. This has led to the depletion of natural resources, loss of biodiversity, and increased vulnerability to climate change. The result is a global food system that is both unsustainable and inequitable, with millions facing hunger and malnutrition, not to mention depressed rural economies, leaving small-town populations ripe for the picking for right-wing populist grifters. 5. Political instability and conflict. The economic insecurity and social fragmentation caused by neoliberal policies create fertile ground for political instability and conflict. The erosion of public trust in institutions, the rise of populist movements, and the increasing polarization of societies are all symptoms of a system in crisis. Furthermore, the competition for resources and markets exacerbated by neoliberal globalization can fuel tensions and conflicts between nations. The evidence is clear. Neoliberal capitalism, in its current form, is unsustainable. Its inherent contradictions and its tendency to prioritize profit over people and planet have created a web of interconnected crises that threaten our collective future. Addressing these challenges requires a fundamental shift away from the current paradigm. We need an economic system that prioritizes human well-being, social justice, and environmental sustainability. This will involve rethinking our relationship with nature, redistributing wealth and power, and strengthening democratic institutions. The time for incremental change is over. We need a bold and transformative vision for a just and sustainable future. What do you think about neoliberalism? Leave your comments below and let's continue the conversation. Please like and subscribe for more terrestrial extras, and thank you for watching.